It's hard, but let God handle it. We've all had moments when we find ourselves caught in the storm, overwhelmed by the circumstances of life, feeling as though we are standing at the edge of a precipice, unsure of how to move forward. The weight of our struggles can be so heavy that we wonder if we will ever be able to carry it. The bills that pile up, the relationships that seem to crumble, the health issues that refuse to go away, and the constant pressure of expectations can make us feel as if we're drowning. But beloved, let me tell you something. There is a place in God where we can release it all. When life gets hard and the burden becomes unbearable, we have a choice. We can choose to try and figure it all out on our own, or we can choose to let God handle it. Let me remind you that when life is difficult, it is not an indication of God's abandonment. In fact, it's often in those very moments of hardship that He is closest to us. There is a spiritual law, a divine principle that says when we reach the end of our own abilities, that's where God's grace begins to operate. You may feel like you're at your breaking point, but God is telling you, you haven't seen what I can do yet. There is power in surrendering the weight to God and letting Him take the burden that you cannot carry on your own. When we are walking through dark valleys, we tend to focus on the difficulty, the pain, the tears. It's natural. But God calls us to focus not on what's against us, but on the one who is for us. He is greater than the storm, greater than the problems we face, and greater than the giants that seem to stand before us. Every challenge, every mountain that seems impossible to climb is an opportunity for God to show up in a way we've never seen before. But here's the key. You can't keep trying to handle it all yourself. God doesn't just want to help you with the easy stuff. He wants to take the impossible things and show you His power. I know that when you're in the middle of a crisis, the last thing you may want to hear is, let go and let God. It sounds easy in theory, but in practice, it's hard. We live in a world that values control. We are taught that if we work hard enough, push long enough, and plan meticulously, we can overcome anything. But there's a point in every person's life when they realize they can't do it all. You can't control everything. You can't fix everything. And that's okay. It's in that realization that God's strength can be made perfect. The key to moving from a place of frustration and exhaustion to a place of peace and victory is recognizing that God is in control, even when you don't see it. God's timing is not our timing. God's plans are not always our plans. But if we trust Him, if we truly believe that He is good and that His plans for us are greater than anything we could imagine, we will find peace in knowing that He's working behind the scenes, even when we don't understand what's going on in our lives. Well, I know that it's hard to trust when you can't see the way out, but I want you to remember that God is never caught off guard by your situation. He has a plan for you that transcends the obstacles you face. Your breakthrough may not come in the form you expect, but it's coming. God is working in ways that you cannot see right now, and you have to hold on to that truth. Don't let the darkness of the moment make you forget that the light of God's promises is still shining. The Bible tells us that God has plans for our lives, plans to prosper us and not to harm us, plans to give us a hope and a future. Those are not just nice words. Those are promises that we can hold on to. Even when everything around you feels like it's falling apart, God's plan for you is still intact. There is purpose in the pain. There is growth in the struggle. There is glory in the overcoming. But to experience that, you must surrender. You must let go of the need to control and trust God to handle what you cannot. That doesn't mean that you do nothing. It doesn't mean that you sit back and just wait for things to magically fix themselves. What it means is that you do what you can do and then trust God to do what you can't. That's where the peace comes in. When you let God handle it, you're no longer carrying the burden alone. You've released it into His hands, and now He is working on your behalf. When you surrender to God, you're not giving up. You're giving God permission to do what only he can do. You're saying, Lord, I trust you with my life. I trust you with my future. I trust you with my family. I trust you with my finances. I trust you with my health. And when you do that, something shifts in the spiritual realm. You may not feel it immediately, but there is a change taking place. God begins to move on your behalf. The angels are dispatched. The resources are being aligned. The doors are being opened. But it requires your faith, your surrender, your willingness to trust. The battle isn't yours to fight alone. It's God's battle. He's the one who has the ultimate victory. The victory belongs to him, and he wants to share that victory with you. That's why he says, cast your cares upon me, for I care for you. When you cast your cares on God, you are releasing the weight of your worries and letting him carry it. That doesn't mean the struggles will go away instantly, but it does mean that you no longer have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. It means that you can stand firm in the assurance that God has everything under control. The journey to trusting God with our struggles begins with a decision to let go, a decision to stop trying to control everything and to surrender the outcome to God. It may take time, it may take effort, but it's worth it. Because when you surrender, God begins to work in ways that you can't even imagine. He starts to move things in your favor. He opens doors that no man can shut. He makes a way where there seems to be no way. God can handle it. He can handle the pain, the disappointment, the brokenness, the confusion. He is big enough, strong enough, and loving enough to take it all and make something beautiful out of it. Don't try to carry what was never meant to be yours to carry. Let go and let God handle it. In those moments when the weight is too much, remember that God is faithful. He will never leave you nor forsake you. He is with you every step of the way, even when you don't feel him. His love for you is constant. His plans for you are good, and his power is greater than anything you can face. So the next time you find yourself in the midst of a storm, when the burden feels too heavy, and when the road ahead seems impossible, remember, it's hard, but let God handle it. He's got you. He's got this. And if you trust him, you will see the victory on the other side. In life's toughest moments, we often struggle with the desire to control everything. However, true peace comes from recognizing that God is in control. By surrendering our worries, struggles, and uncertainties to him, we allow his strength and wisdom to work in ways we cannot imagine. Even when it feels like everything is falling apart, God's plan for us remains intact. Trusting in his timing, even when it doesn't align with our expectations, allows us to experience his grace and faithfulness in the midst of our difficulties. His plans are for our good, even if we don't immediately see the full picture. Life can often feel overwhelming, but we must remember that God is bigger than any challenge or obstacle we face. We are not meant to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. By letting God handle the burdens we cannot carry, we free ourselves to experience his peace and provision in every situation. In every person's life, there comes a time when they face moments of great difficulty, overwhelming circumstances, or situations that seem beyond their control. It's in these moments that we often find ourselves struggling to maintain control, to keep everything together, to manage the overwhelming pressure, whether it's an unexpected health diagnosis, a relationship falling apart, a financial crisis, or the weight of personal loss. We are confronted with the reality that some things are simply beyond our grasp. We find ourselves at a crossroads, caught between the need to fix everything ourselves and the daunting truth that we can't. It's in these moments that the most profound lesson we can learn is the art of surrender. Surrendering control to God. Control is something that many of us value deeply. It gives us a sense of security, stability, and even identity. We like to feel that we are in charge, that we have the ability to steer our lives in the direction we want them to go. Our society encourages this belief, telling us that if we just work hard enough, plan enough, and strive enough, we can achieve whatever we desire. But what happens when our efforts fall short? What happens when the challenges we face are too great for us to overcome by our own strength? That's where the concept of surrender comes in. Surrendering control to God is not about giving up or being passive in the face of difficulty. It is about recognizing that we, as human beings, are limited in our abilities, and there are things in life that we simply cannot change on our own. Surrender is about acknowledging that God is bigger, wiser, and more capable than we are, and trusting Him to handle the things we cannot. This act of surrender opens the door for God to work in our lives in ways that we could never imagine. When we let go of our need to control everything, we make room for God to move and do what only He can do. The first step in learning to surrender control to God is understanding that He is sovereign. To surrender means to relinquish our claim to ownership over our lives and submit ourselves to the will of God. It's recognizing that God is in charge of the universe, that He knows what's best for us, and that His plans for us are greater than anything we could create for ourselves. Scripture reminds us in Isaiah 55, 8-9, that God's thoughts and ways are higher than ours. We often can't understand His timing or His reasoning, but we can trust that He has a purpose for everything, even when things don't go according to our own plans. In order to truly surrender control to God, we must come to a place of humility. Humility is the opposite of pride, which often leads us to believe that we can handle everything on our own. It is a humbling experience to admit that we don't have all the answers, that we can't solve every problem, and that we can't bear every burden by ourselves. But when we humble ourselves before God, we open ourselves to His guidance, His wisdom, and His strength. Humility allows us to acknowledge that we need Him, that without Him we are weak, and that we are fully dependent on His grace and mercy. One of the reasons we struggle with surrender is because of fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of losing control, fear of what might happen if we let go of the reins. We may worry that things will get worse if we stop trying to fix everything ourselves, or we may be afraid that God won't come through for us. But when we look at Scripture, we see time and time again that God is faithful. He is not a man that He should lie, and His promises are true. When we surrender to Him, we are not giving up hope. We are placing our hope in the one who has never failed us. He has proven time and time again that He is trustworthy, and we can have confidence that He will not leave us or forsake us. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus tells us to come to Him when we are weary and burdened, and He promises to give us rest. This is an invitation to surrender, to bring our heavy burdens, our worries, and our fears to Him and let Him carry them for us. The weight of our problems does not have to crush us. We don't have to face life's challenges alone. When we surrender control to God, we are saying, Lord, I can't do this on my own. I need You. I trust You. I believe that You will make a way where there seems to be no way. And in that surrender, we find peace. We find comfort. We find rest for our souls. Surrendering control doesn't mean that we do nothing. It doesn't mean that we sit back and wait for God to do everything for us. It means that we do what we can, but we do it with the understanding that God is the one who will ultimately bring about the results. We take action, but we do so with a spirit of dependence on Him. We work, but we trust in His provision. We make decisions, but we seek His guidance. We do our part, and then we let go and let God handle the rest. When we choose to surrender, we are also choosing to trust God's timing. One of the hardest aspects of surrender is accepting that God's timing is not always our timing. We want things to happen now. We want immediate results. But God's timing is perfect. He sees the bigger picture, and He knows when the right moment is for things to unfold. His delays are not denials, they are part of His greater plan. When we surrender to His timing, we release the anxiety and frustration that comes from trying to make things happen on our own schedule. We rest in the assurance that God knows what is best and will act at the right time. Surrendering control also means letting go of the need to understand everything. Often we want to know why things are happening the way they are. We want answers, explanations, and clarity. But God doesn't always give us the answers we're looking for. Instead, He asks us to trust Him even when we don't understand. Proverbs 3:05-6 reminds us to trust in the Lord with all our heart and lean not on our own understanding. This requires a deep level of faith. Faith that God is good, that He is working in our lives for our good, even when we can't see how. When we surrender our need to understand, we allow God to reveal His wisdom in His time. It's important to remember that surrender is not a one-time event, it is a daily choice. Every day we are faced with decisions, challenges, and obstacles that require us to either hold on to control or to let go and trust God. The act of surrender is ongoing. It is a continual process of releasing our fears, our worries, and our plans to God. Each day we must choose to surrender anew, to trust that God will provide, to trust that He is in control, and to trust that He will lead us where we need to go. One of the most powerful aspects of surrender is the peace that it brings. When we are holding on tightly to control, we are often filled with anxiety, stress, and fear. But when we let go and surrender to God, we experience a peace that surpasses all understanding. This peace doesn't come from the absence of problems. It comes from knowing that God is with us in the midst of those problems and that He is in control. Philippians 4:6 tells us to present our requests to God, and the peace of God will guard our hearts and minds. This peace is a gift that comes when we surrender our worries and trust God to handle them. Surrendering control to God doesn't mean that we won't face difficulties or challenges. In fact, life will continue to have its ups and downs. But it does mean that we don't have to carry the weight of those difficulties alone. It means that we can walk through the storms of life with the confidence that God is right there with us, holding us, guiding us, and providing for us. It means that we can face the future with hope, knowing that our lives are in the hands of a loving, faithful God who will never leave us. When we surrender control to God, we open ourselves up to His transformation. It is in surrender that God can do His greatest work in us. He can heal our brokenness, renew our minds, and shape us into the people He has called us to be. Surrendering allows God to take the old, the broken, and the imperfect, and to make something beautiful out of it. It's through surrender that we experience God's grace, His mercy, and His power in the most profound ways. Ultimately, surrendering control is about trusting God fully and completely. It's about acknowledging that He is good, that He is faithful, and that He has our best interests at heart. It's about relinquishing the burden of trying to do everything on our own and embracing the peace that comes from trusting that God will handle it. When we surrender control to God, we are not losing something, we are gaining everything. We are gaining His peace, His wisdom, His strength, and His love. And that, beloved, is the most beautiful gift we can ever receive. Life is filled with moments of uncertainty, moments when the road ahead seems unclear and we're unsure of which direction to take. It's easy to become frustrated when things don't unfold as we expect, especially when our plans and timelines don't match up with what's happening around us. We live in a world where instant gratification is the norm, where everything is expected to happen quickly. And when things don't happen according to our own schedule, we often find ourselves anxious, impatient, or even angry. But as difficult as it may be, trusting in God's timing and plan is one of the most essential aspects of walking in faith. We are all familiar with the feeling of wanting things to happen on our terms and within the time frame we've set for ourselves. The dreams, the goals, the desires we have for our lives, often we want them to come to fruition immediately. Whether it's a job opportunity, a relationship, a family situation, or a financial breakthrough, we tend to think that the sooner the better. But God's timing doesn't always align with our own. In fact, it's often in those moments of waiting that we experience the most growth, the most learning, and the most dependence on God's wisdom and sovereignty. Trusting in God's timing is about understanding that He sees the bigger picture while we only see what's directly in front of us. It's about acknowledging that God's plans for us are greater than any plans we could have for ourselves. There's a passage in the Bible that speaks to this truth beautifully. Jeremiah 29:11 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans for welfare and not for evil, to give you a future and a hope." This verse reminds us that God has a plan for us, and that plan is rooted in His goodness and love. Even when life doesn't go as we expect, we can trust that His plans are better than anything we could create on our own. One of the reasons why trusting in God's timing can be so difficult is because it often requires us to let go of our own sense of control. We like to feel that we have some degree of authority over our lives, that we are the ones making decisions and setting our own course. But true trust in God means relinquishing that control, understanding that we are not in charge and that God has a better plan for us. This doesn't mean that we should be passive in our lives, waiting for things to happen without effort, but it does mean that we need to surrender the outcome to God, knowing that He will work everything out according to His will. The process of surrendering our timeline to God requires patience, a quality that many of us struggle with. In today's world, everything is fast-paced. We can order food with the push of a button, have it delivered in minutes, and even access information instantly with the help of the internet. This sense of speed can cause us to expect quick results in every area of our lives. But God doesn't work on the same schedule as we do. His timing is perfect, even when it doesn't feel that way. Waiting on God's timing teaches us patience, a virtue that can only be developed when we are willing to endure periods of uncertainty and delay. Patience doesn't come naturally for most people. We want things now, and when they don't happen, we become frustrated. However, patience is not about doing nothing while we wait. It is an active trust in God's ability to bring about the right outcomes at the right time. The Bible teaches us in Romans 8:25, "But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience." Waiting doesn't mean we're sitting idly by doing nothing. Rather, it means we are trusting in God, continuing to do the work He has called us to do, and knowing that He will bring about His plans in His perfect time. Sometimes trusting in God's timing can feel like waiting for something that will never come. We may wonder if our prayers are being heard or if we will ever see the breakthrough we've been hoping for. But this is where our faith must rise. Trusting in God's timing means trusting that He knows what we need and when we need it, even if it doesn't align with our own desires. There are times in our lives when we feel like we've been waiting forever for an answer. But it's important to remember that God's delays are not His denials. Just because something hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it won't happen. God's timing is always perfect, and when the time is right, He will bring about His promises in ways that exceed our expectations. The truth is, God is not bound by time in the way we are. He is eternal and outside of time, and He operates according to His own divine schedule. This is hard for us to comprehend because we are so focused on the immediate and the urgent, but God sees everything from an eternal perspective. What may seem like a delay or a setback is actually part of His greater plan for us. In the moments when we feel as though nothing is happening, God may be preparing us, shaping us, and aligning circumstances in ways we cannot yet see. The waiting period is not wasted. Is part of the process of God refining us for what's ahead. There is also a powerful lesson in trusting God's timing when it comes to how He answers our prayers. Sometimes we pray for something and believe that we should receive it right away. But God knows what is best for us, and His answers are always aligned with His will. Sometimes God says yes to our requests. Other times He says no, because He knows that what we want is not what we need. And sometimes He says wait because the timing is not right yet. In each instance, God's answer is motivated by His love for us. He is not denying us out of cruelty, but he is acting in our best interest. Trusting in God's timing is about trusting that he sees what we cannot and that he knows exactly when we are ready for the things we are asking for. Throughout the Bible, we see examples of people who had to trust in God's timing, even when it didn't make sense. Take the story of Abraham and Sarah, for example. God promised Abraham that he would be the father of many nations, but for years he and Sarah were childless. They waited and waited and waited for God's promise to be fulfilled. In the midst of their waiting, they grew impatient and tried to take matters into their own hands. But God's plan was not to be rushed. In his perfect timing, when Sarah was far beyond childbearing age, God fulfilled his promise, and Isaac was born. If Abraham and Sarah had trusted in their own timing, they would have missed out on the incredible blessing that God had for them. Their story is a reminder that God's timing is always better than ours, and that his plans are worth waiting for. Another powerful example is the story of David. David was anointed to be king of Israel as a young man, but it wasn't until many years later that he actually became king. During that time, he faced countless challenges, including being pursued by King Saul, who sought to kill him. David had every opportunity to take matters into his own hands and seize the throne, but he trusted in God's timing. He knew that God had promised him the throne, and he waited patiently for the day when God would bring it to pass. And when that time finally came, David was ready to step into the role God had prepared for him. His story is a testament to the importance of trusting in God's timing, even when we don't understand why things are happening the way they are. When we trust in God's timing, we also learn to trust in his wisdom. We may not always understand why things unfold the way they do, but we can be confident that God knows what he is doing. His plan for our lives is far greater than anything we could imagine. He has a purpose for every season, every delay, and every struggle we face. Even when things seem unclear, we can trust that God is at work behind the scenes, orchestrating everything for our good. As Proverbs 3:5-6 reminds us, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. Ultimately, trusting in God's timing and plan is an act of surrender. It's about letting go of our own desires and plans and submitting ourselves to God's will. It's about trusting that his plan is better than anything we could create on our own. When we do this, we experience peace in the midst of uncertainty. We can rest knowing that God is in control and that he is working all things together for our good. Trusting in God's timing doesn't mean that life will always go according to our plans, but it does mean that we can have confidence that no matter what happens, God's plan will always prevail. Life often presents us with challenges and situations that feel insurmountable. We are faced with obstacles that seem too large, too overwhelming, and too complex to navigate. There are moments when it feels as if the weight of the world is resting on our shoulders. We look at the problem in front of us and think, how can I carry this? How can I solve this? How can I fix what is broken? In these moments, the desire to do it all ourselves, to manage every aspect of our lives, and to maintain control is a very human response. However, one of the most powerful lessons we can learn in these times is that God can handle what we can't. In fact, he is more than capable of carrying what we are unable to bear, guiding us through what we cannot see, and doing what we cannot do on our own. It is easy to get caught in the trap of self-reliance. We live in a society that values independence, personal achievement, and the idea that we must handle our own affairs. From a young age, we are taught to be strong, to stand on our own, and to solve our problems. While this is important in many ways, it can also lead to the dangerous misconception that we must be able to do everything by ourselves. We live in an era where doing it all is often seen as a measure of success. But the truth is that life will inevitably present us with situations where we cannot handle things alone. And in these moments, it's important to realize that we do not have to carry everything on our own. When we look at our struggles, whether they are emotional, physical, financial, or relational, we often begin by trying to find solutions within our own strength. We may try to push through, work harder, or simply will ourselves to overcome the challenge. But sometimes, despite our best efforts, we find that the situation is beyond our control. The more we try to manage everything, the more overwhelmed we become. It is at this point that we need to stop and acknowledge that we do not have the power to fix everything on our own. This is where the recognition of God's ability to handle what we can't comes into play. The Bible tells us that God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and ever-present. He is the creator of the universe, the one who spoke the world into existence. There is nothing that is too big for God to handle. No challenge is beyond his reach, and no burden is too heavy for him to bear. When we face situations that seem too great for us, it is crucial to remember that we serve a God who is bigger than our problems. In Matthew 11:28-30, Jesus invites us to come to him with our burdens, saying, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." This passage reminds us that we don't have to carry the weight of our struggles alone. God is willing to take our burdens and give us rest. There is a profound truth in the idea that God can handle what we can't. He is able to do the impossible. When we are faced with challenges that feel too big to overcome, we are reminded that God can bring about what seems impossible. He can heal what is broken, restore what is lost, and provide what is needed. There is no limit to his power, and there is nothing that is too difficult for him. The Bible is full of examples of God handling situations that seem impossible for humans. In the Old Testament, we see how God parted the Red Sea to make a way for the Israelites to escape from Egypt. In the New Testament, Jesus performed countless miracles, from healing the sick to raising the dead. In each of these situations, God demonstrated his ability to do what was beyond human capacity. When we acknowledge that God can handle what we can't, we are essentially choosing to place our trust in his abilities rather than our own. Trusting in God's ability to handle the impossible requires faith. It requires us to step back and let go of our need for control. It means recognizing that we are not in charge and that we do not have to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. Faith is about surrendering the areas of our lives that we cannot fix and trusting that God will take care of them. The Apostle Paul writes in Philippians 4:6-7, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." This passage reminds us that when we bring our concerns to God, he will give us peace and take care of the things we cannot control. Letting go of control and trusting that God can handle what we can't is not a passive act. It is an active decision to seek God's guidance, to pray for wisdom, and to trust that he is working in the background. Trusting God's ability to handle our problems doesn't mean that we sit back and do nothing. It means that we acknowledge our limitations and allow God to work through us, guiding our actions and decisions. It means recognizing that he is working in ways that we cannot see or understand, but we trust that his plan is perfect and that he will bring about what is best for us. One of the challenges of trusting God with our burdens is that it often requires us to wait. Waiting is not easy, especially in a world where everything is expected to happen quickly. We are accustomed to instant gratification, and waiting can feel like an unbearable burden. However, waiting on God's timing is an important aspect of trusting him. When we wait on God, we are giving him the space to work in his own time. Isaiah 40:31 tells us, "But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. Waiting on God allows us to rest in his promises and trust that he will act when the time is right. There are also times when we wonder if God will really come through for us, when our problems seem insurmountable and we've been waiting for what seems like forever. It can be easy to doubt. We may ask ourselves, will God really handle this? Will he truly provide? Will he really show up? But in these moments, it's important to remember that God is faithful. He has proven time and time again throughout history that he is trustworthy. He has never failed his people, and he will not fail us now. In 1 Corinthians 1:20, the Apostle Paul reminds us, for no matter how many promises God has made, they are yes in Christ. God's promises are true, and he will fulfill them according to his will. One of the reasons why God can handle what we can't is because he sees the bigger picture. We are limited by our own perspective. We can only see what is directly in front of us, but God sees the end from the beginning. He knows how everything fits together and how each event in our lives plays a part in the greater story. Trusting that God can handle what we can't means acknowledging that he knows what is best for us, even when we don't understand why certain things are happening. Proverbs 3:5-6 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. This verse encourages us to trust God's perspective, even when we can't see the whole picture. When we trust that God can handle what we can't, we also experience a sense of peace that transcends our understanding. Life's struggles can be overwhelming, and the weight of our problems can feel crushing. But when we place our trust in God, we find peace. Philippians 4:7 tells us that the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard our hearts and minds. This peace doesn't come from the absence of problems. It comes from knowing that God is in control and that he is handling the things we cannot. It's a peace that comes from trusting that God is working all things together for our good. The truth is, we will never be able to handle everything on our own. There will always be moments in life when we are faced with challenges that are too great for us to bear. But the good news is that we don't have to carry those burdens alone. God can handle what we can't, and he is more than capable of carrying our heavy loads. We are called to trust in his power, his wisdom, and his timing. When we let go of our need to control everything and place our trust in God, we experience peace, freedom, and rest. God can handle what we can't, and that is something we can take comfort in every day.